and welcome to another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. I have with me today here author Alisa Kriegel, who's also a psychologist with a thriving private practice in Manhattan, working with adults and couples. She is on a mission to help people give themselves permission to seek pleasure and believe everyone deserves to experience incredible, mind blowing sex. Her memoir, From Sexless Marriage to Sex Goddess, is her first book. Her podcast, Let's Talk About Sex, really is on all platforms. All right, Alisa, how are you?
Hi,
Thank you for
Natasha.
joining
So
me.
good to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. So, Alisa, your book is discusses a hot topic,
Yes.
which like I guess couples won't talk about, which is like sexless marriages. So, and it's based on your memoir. So, I'm actually curious, what made you write this kind of raw, might be painful memoir exposing things that probably people don't want to talk about. So, what made you
Yeah.
write about this?
I think that is part of the reason. I think that was part of my motivation is so many times when we are in something like a sexless marriage, it can feel extremely lonely and we feel very alone in it. And because there's so much shame around it, no one really talks about it, except maybe in jokes, you know. But no
Yeah,
one talks authentically about it. Like, I've been married forever. Of course we don't have sex, right? Ha ha.
yeah,
But
yeah.
there's people who do, and it's really painful not to. So I think feeling so alone and realizing, I think as when I came out the other side and started dating, I thought, well, no one's talking about it, so someone has to be the first person to talk about it. And I felt that being a psychologist and for people knowing that no matter all the training I've had and how much I can help other people, I still had my own issues, as we all do, and I'm still human. And if I could talk about this, then maybe it could help more people. So I really felt like the work I do is one-on-one, either with an individual or a couple. And I've worked with couples since with sexless marriages. And so I thought this is a way to help more people than I could help one-on-one in my office.
Okay, so how would you define a sexless marriage? Is it no sex at all, or is it like few times a year? What's the
Yeah. So
actual
it's
definition
interesting.
of no?
The researchers who talk about it, because I did a lot of kind of looking at the researchers, when it's talked about in statistics, sexless marriage is considered sex 10 times a year or less. So anywhere from none at all to 10 times a year is the range. So 10 times a year is less than once a month, right?
Okay, okay.
And that's what people are considering sexless. I've found that the majority of people I work with, and for myself included, it was far less than the 10 times a year. And many of the people I work with and I've spoken to and who've reached out to me from reading the book, it's been no sex at all for years or even decades.
Wow. So what was like the number one reason that makes marriages sexless?
It's I don't know if anyone has a number one reason, but oftentimes it's just people stop talking about it. There's so
Okay.
much shame, and what I find is there's such a lack of communication, or people stop asking. There's one partner who's not interested. But what I find is it's usually a lot of really complicated factors. So I was really
Okay.
careful in writing my book. For my story, the easy answer that I thought people can cling to this easily is after a 25-year marriage, my husband came out.
Okay.
He fell in love with a man. I had always had a sense that he was bisexual, so it was surprising, but not completely out of left field, but it was still a surprise. And that would be the easy answer. Oh, there's a mismatch. He's actually more interested in sex with men. Okay. But that's not the whole truth. And so for us, like most couples, it's complicated. And what really happened is we were young. I had my own issues around sex. There's an incredible lack of sex education, not just for teenagers, but for adults as we get older. So
Mm.
I met him, I was young, I was 20. We were married by like 23. And I was on birth control from the time I was probably about 18 years old and didn't know that the birth control affects how wet you get as a woman when you get turned on. You're much drier. It affects, your body and how you feel in your body. I had a medical condition that I didn't learn about until I was 40, which is a tilted uterus or a retroverted uterus. It can make intercourse painful. So my lack of knowledge about my own body and lack of sexual education on both our parts, we never thought lube was an issue, but it probably would have helped. We didn't
Mm.
know that I had, I didn't share except for once or twice that intercourse was painful. And the way it came out when I said it was angry that how come you can't fix this kind of thing? You should know better. You're the man.
Mm.
And he held on to that and made him very nervous to have sex with me, made it very uncomfortable. And then at some point, we stopped talking about it. It just
Mm.
became something that we did once in a while, and it was fine, but not great enough to keep doing. And I think that's what happens to most people. Sex becomes fraught and difficult, and there's challenges, and it's too much for some couples to talk about, so they stop talking. And when the talking about sex stops and the sex stops, then you're in a whole new pattern, and that's the new normal for you. And to get out of that rut takes a lot of work.
Hmm.
So that's what I've seen happen for a lot of people.
So in the beginning of your marriage, so the difficulty started from the early years of marriage and continued, or did it happen later in life?
It happened, I think when we're in those early stages, there's so much hormones flowing and so much of those right in those first 6 months of a relationship. And when that slows down, things change with sex. I think for us, it really started pretty early on. And I
Mm.
think for myself, and I've seen this with a lot of couples, we make choices in our couples. And for me, I chose someone who was a best friend and an intellectual partner. And we shared a lot of the same cultural interests and activities. So he was a great companion. He was great to talk to. He was wonderful. We were both very affectionate with each other, but we never grew together as lovers. We never
Mm.
really explored that part. And so I think a lot of people choose comfort or security or friendship and don't always have that sexual part that's developed.
Mm. And what if a couple are happy with this arrangement? Like, you know, it's like it's not a big part of who we are. We're still affectionate. We
Yeah.
still best friends. We're still kind to each other.
Hmm.
Why break the marriage over this?
Yeah. I think a lot of people stay for exactly that reason. Right. And I
Okay.
think I was on that path. You know,
Okay.
um, we'd been together 25 years, and I had, approached at one point, I think in my 40s, early, as we were, right before I was getting pregnant and all of that, sex was becoming a little bit more comfortable, but we were still so much in this rut that it was uncomfortable emotionally. Um, and I've said oftentimes that had he not fallen in love with someone else and
Yeah.
sort of was the catalyst that blew up the marriage, I don't know if I would have had the courage to leave it for the same reasons you're saying. It was comfortable and it was good enough and it was loving enough. And that's a really scary thing to change. So I think a lot of people stay, and a lot of people also push down their regret or resentment. I definitely did. Like, oh, you don't get everything, right? We hear that all the time in marriage.
Yeah.
Well, you don't get everything you want. Okay, so I didn't get romance and sex.
Yeah.
But it was painful. And I definitely missed that sort of attention and missed that connection. But having met so young, I had never had really great sex in my life. So I also didn't know what I was missing.
And you only found this out in later in life, in your 40s and 50s, I
Yeah,
guess.
so
Yeah.
I didn't start dating until I was about we 47, 48 is when around when the marriage when I was ready after we had set, after things had separated and after he was already dating. Obviously he had fallen in love with someone, but I wasn't ready to date for a little while. And so yeah, in my late 40s is when I was like, oh, this is great. This is
Yeah.
really great. And I had to get in touch with myself. And I also now knew what this condition was and how I was affected by it. And I'm very blunt in the book. I talk about size, genital size. I talk about fit. Because what I learned is that like certain size penises fit better than others for me. So this idea everyone wants a big dick, I didn't. I was like, no, nope, that's too much for me. So it was like all these things I had not really explored. And in the exploration, I realized, oh, there's this whole part of myself I really cut off.
So how did you feel in the marriage, when you were in the marriage? And did you blame yourself? Were you jealous of your friends who were like saying, "Oh, my husband always wants sex," whatever? Like,
Yeah.
what were your feelings during this time?
Yeah. Interestingly, I didn't have a lot of the female friendships that are all like joking and talking openly about sex. And I had a
Yeah.
lot of friends who were not really having a lot of sex with their husbands, or was just
Okay.
very, average, but no one was really talking about it in great detail, sort of until I started dating and bringing up sex. So for whatever reason, I just didn't have a lot of that. But I often felt, I think we all grow up seeing, and as adults, all watch rom-coms and we,
Yeah.
read books with great romance in it. And I felt really, honestly, maybe there's something wrong with me. I think I don't know if that's our law, how we're raised as women to take on a lot of responsibility for things. But I certainly I was an oldest child. So maybe that's also part of it. But I really felt like somehow I'm not in shape enough. I need to get to the gym more. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not like energetic enough. Whatever it was, I definitely was blaming myself and not realizing that, I think there is a sort of chemistry that we have with people. And I think while my ex-husband and I had a wonderful friendship, chemistry, and we're very deep and very caring of each other, we really didn't have a great sexual chemistry. It just
Okay.
wasn't there for
Yeah.
us. And he was not expressive in the way I hoped. And I do think part of that probably was that his sexual attraction was more towards men,
Towards men. Yeah.
whereas his
Yeah.
emotional connection was more towards women. So he was really in a bind. He
Do you
really
blame
loved
him?
women. Yeah, what?
Do you blame him in hindsight? Do you think
I don't
that?
blame him. I feel bad for a society in which, had he been more comfortable, he was struggling too. I was
Okay.
certainly angry. Look, this is like after 8 years of this happening. So I'm in a very
Okay.
different place. I was angry for a very long time.
Okay.
Um, I don't think blame is the word. I was angry and I was really, what's often underneath anger, I think, is fear. And I
Mm.
was afraid. I was really afraid that I had set up this very comfortable life with this person who I knew really well. And we now had a son. At the time when this happened, my son was about 7. And what now happens to our son? What happens to me? Like, how do we live apart? We really grew up together from 20 until 45, 47. We grew up together, and now this person who's the most significant person in my life is not going to be in my life in the same way.
Mm.
So I was terrified. By the end, I was also really sad for him. That what was it in society, what was it in me that didn't allow him to be honest with himself about his feelings for so long? And it was probably the same thing I was feeling, which is, this is fine enough the way it is.
Mm.
But for him, there was a lot of shame also around his sexuality.
So after you published the memoir, or even before, was he aware that you're writing a memoir?
It was, I told him, he's not, to this day, he's not happy about it. He's not like, oh, yay, our
Okay.
our sex life is going to be put out in writing. Um, he's not read it. I gave him some chapters that were about him to show him, how I was approaching it. And I was very conscious. There's a lot of chapters that I edited out because it was too much about him and his psychology and his upbringing. And I realized it's not his story. He's the catalyst to my story, and he's a part of my story. But I think as writers, we have to always be careful of whose story are we telling.
Yeah.
And for me, I wanted to make sure I'm telling my story. And so if it was what is he thinking, what was he going on in him, I had to leave that out because he's not here in this. It's not for me to tell his story. If he ever wants to write, he used to write quite a bit, not as his profession, but he's written stories, short stories, things, started novels. And I've always said, well, I'm going to write my story. And if you want to write one, you can write yours. But I'm really careful that I was very careful to not make him the villain in the story.
Did you use his real name?
I did not. I,
Okay. Is
I,
that
I changed, I changed all the names in the book
okay?
except
Okay.
for close friends who gave me permission to use their name.
Okay.
For the protection of the people, because I'm talking about delicate issues, and for the protection of my husband and my son, who, again, my son was 7. He didn't ask to be put in a book. And there are definitely several chapters about him, or my relationship with him as a mom and son. And so I changed both their names. Yeah.
Okay. Were you worried about being sued, defamation or stuff like that?
You know, there's a point right before you publish where everyone's sort of talking about, like, oh, is there anything in the book? And I wasn't, only because I not only changed people's names, I changed identifying characteristics about them. So I changed what jobs they had.
Okay.
And also because I don't think I showed anyone in a terrible light, but there were people who were married and had permission from a spouse, but sort of a don't ask, don't tell, like,
Mm.
who were in sexless marriages with their spouse, and their wife did not want sex, and said, it was fairly common, and said, I know you need this, go have sex, don't do it in our house, I don't want to know the details. And so for people, there's people who I felt like it wasn't fair of me if anyone would find them. So yes, I changed names, I changed professions so that they wouldn't be recognizable.
Okay, so what do you think people who are in sexless marriages, especially those who are not happy with the situation, like because people
Yeah.
might be in sexless marriages and they're okay with it, but if they're not okay with it and they can, for for the reason that you mentioned, they don't have the courage or the circumstances to get out of it, what do you advise them to do?
The easiest thing, the first step I advise everyone is first, like, know yourself and know, this is what's not okay. This doesn't feel good. And the next thing is to have the courage to at least speak up, to at least say something.
To who, to your partner or
To your
to your
partner. I
friends?
mean, look, I think therapy is great. I'm obviously a big fan of therapy, but I think it's a conversation with the partner. And I think too often in couples, what I've seen for myself as well is, and especially once you have children, if there's children involved, even if you don't have children, I think we get into such well-worn patterns with our partners, and it feels really scary to say anything because, oh, this is just what we do, right? It might be
Mm,
anything, even from, right, discussing leaving a job or changing a job and not having as much stability, or, wanting to pursue your writing or wanting to pursue, a creative endeavor. You're rocking the boat. And so I think the first step is always conversation and seeing if there can be conversation about, I'm really missing this, or I feel like this is something we need to be talking about. And if you're not comfortable talking, maybe we can go to a therapist to talk about it. But
mm,
someone always has to have the courage to do something different. In my
mm,
case, it I don't think it was a courage thing as much as a desperation thing. My husband was working away from the home and feeling very lonely, and obviously had a lot of cut off parts of himself, and so got into these relationships and ended up falling in love. So was that courageous? It was, that he told me. I mean, he's
mm,
been with I know there's a lot of men out there who I've worked with, who I've spoken to, who have affairs going on, straight or gay, that are, I don't want to change anything at home. I don't want to, rock the boat. I'm just going to have an affair. I think is way more courageous to say something. I didn't find
yeah.
out by reading a text. He told me. So
Mm,
someone has to be courageous enough. And then at some point I had to have the courage, because at some point it really was, well, this is fine. Why can't we just go on living this way? And meaning, he has a boyfriend and maybe I date. And I said, when I really think about what I want the whole package. I want the
mm,
person who I'm with to also be my friend and my lover. And I don't want to do it all in pieces. So someone has to have the courage to say what they really want, to first know themselves enough to know what you want, or to just know that the situation isn't feeling good, and then have the courage to speak up about it. And
mm,
that's really what it takes. And so many people are afraid to do that.
mm.
And sometimes it takes the person who feels like they're going to take that step, going to a therapist or going to a good friend for support to help them with that next step.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna pivot a bit and talk a bit about the publishing process
Yes,
and the
yes,
writing process. So you wrote the
yes.
book, and what was the trigger that made you say, I want to sit down and write the book? I coach a number of writers, and sitting down to write the book is probably one of the hardest things.
Yes.
That So what made you decide, okay, I'm gonna do this, and how
Yeah.
did you commit to that? Yeah.
That is still really hard, the sitting down part. So the trigger for me to write the book was, my dearest friend who I was starting some of my first dating stories. As I was dating, I was telling her them, and she knew everything. She was the only person who knew what was going on with me and my husband. Told her all my dating stories, and she said, "Oh my God, this should be a book. You should write this." And I had always written in my life. I had always kept journals, poetry, short stories. And I thought, oh, and I just value her and her opinion so much that I actually went home that night and opened my phone and started writing down the first pages of it on my phone, on the notes section of my phone. And I'd say the first 50 pages were probably basically written.
Okay.
Mostly while I was traveling back and forth to work every day. It was before COVID. So I had about 20 minutes on the subway back and forth. And I would take out my notepad and I would write on the train.
On your phone?
On my phone. I would say the first 100 pages were all on my phone. I didn't even translate it to a Word document.
Okay.
I was
I love
clueless.
that, yeah.
I kept changing apps. It was first on the Note app. Then there was some app called Matcha that was for like writing longer essays. And then once I got to 100 pages, I was like, oh, this is kind of choppy. So it was probably not till after 100 pages in that I switched to any sort of normal, what we would expect to write on. Yeah.
So you just used, if you have an iPhone and you just use
I have an iPhone. So there's no excuse. There is no excuse to not write. I'm sorry to ruin that for people. But like I'm a bit of a spontaneous, like if you make me sit down with a blank computer page, I struggle. So but on my phone I could just be like, oh, I'd have some inspiration and I'd start writing. It's like
I think the computer provides some sort of a resistance. I think the idea of sitting behind the computer is a bit intimidating.
Yeah.
But the phone is now becoming like a third hand or like part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And using it to write kind of, I feel, breaks that fear and breaks that resistance, because you're very familiar with this device that you have with you all the time. So that this is fascinating, honestly.
Yeah, it's not intimidating at all, because how many of us write like super long emails to people, or when we're angry at someone, at our partner, we write a long text and we decide whether we're going to send it or not, but we write it all out there. So the phone is like, so it was like a great place for me to just spill my guts, really. Marion Roach Smith, who I adore, who wrote the Memoir project, as I realized this was actually,
I don't know this one. I'm
taking notes. Wonderful. Marion Roach Smith. And it's a little book. It's called the Memoir Project.
Okay.
And it's wonderful. And she's written several memoirs. And she writes about the first draft. She calls it the vomit draft, where you just want to like vomit everything. And there's something about being on the computer that I find makes us feel like more proper. It has to look good. It has to sound good. And there's something about the phone or a scrap of paper. She keeps a little notebook with her wherever she goes to jot down ideas. That just loosens us up a little bit. So that was, honestly, I had another dear friend who knows a lot of writers. And I remember showing it to her at 50 pages and just being like, oh my God, I can't believe I got to 50 pages. Like, how did that happen? And so with each step, it just was like becoming a little more real. I don't think I set out like I'm writing and publishing a book, but in the back of my head, I was like, I can do that. Okay, I'm going to write a book. My friend said, write this. This is a good story. I'm going to write a book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you finished the manuscript. What happened after you finished the manuscript?
Well, so I finished a really rough draft of the manuscript, started doing some editing, and did the old send out query letters to every agent and a few publishers. and got either no response or some people saying it's really wonderful, it's not what I do. Had a dear friend in publishing who kind of made introductions and kind of kept hitting the typical roadblocks. And never could really get enough to know, like, but am I onto something? Is this good? Is the writing good? I was really concerned about, like, do I have, like, is my voice distinctive? I wanted to make sure, like, it's my voice in the book. And
Okay.
I heard Marion also has a podcast she does called QWERTY, and I would listen to that to figure out, to learn more. I'm novice at Memoirs, and a lot of people she spoke to had been with the big five publishing and were starting to go to, I kept hearing this press mention, She Writes Press. Marion knew the publisher. She was a former, and I just kept hearing the name over and over. And I was like, let me look into this. It's hybrid publishing. And what I loved, though, is I didn't know if I would use She Writes, but what I liked is they have a whole process where you submit like the first 5 chapters and then a summary of every single chapter in the book and book comps. Like you it's a big submission process, but they give you an analysis of your book and whether they would be interested, basically red, yellow, green lights. We're not interested. We don't think this is ready. It needs a lot more work. I got a yellow light with my first submission, which is, we think this is really good, but there's a few issues. And they write a really full page to 2, wonderful, thoughtful summary in which they said, like, the beginning is rocky. It feels like you've begun this book 5 different times, which was so true because I was so scared of what I was about to say that I kept being really hesitant. And I was like, damn, they're spot on. It's sort of like, I'm starting, but I'm not. I'm starting, but I'm not, So,
Yeah.
So that was probably what I really needed to hear. And they said I had an editor, but not a full edit, not a full content edit. And they said, look, we think it's really great. We think it needs a content edit. Give it an edit and then send it back to us. And so that's what I did. So I found an editor and we worked on it. We cut about 10,000 words. We moved some things around. And that was probably another year or so that I did that. And then I sent it back to She Writes and it was approved for publishing.
Oh, great.
So
What
it was
was the
exciting.
reaction? What was the reaction after you published it? I am assuming there were good and bad. In I publish books. I always get good and bad feedback. So
Yes.
what was the feedback? Let's start with the negative feedback.
Yeah.
What was the thing that people did not like?
So the negative feedback I had a lot of readers. Readers are much more kind, but still, right? The biggest negative feedback was that it sort of slowed down and got sloggy, like it slogged in areas. And the other big feedback from my content editor was there was a bunch of things that just kept getting repeated, things I kept saying, but in different ways that she felt was like we could bring together and say stronger once rather than these, oh, you said, and that's really boring for a reader. Oh, you said this already. I know that.
Okay.
So a lot of, like, being an editor, there's a lot of decisions to make. And one of the decisions that we made was that we wanted this to be a fun, fast-moving book. My chapters are very short. There's a lot of insight and depth, but there's also a lot of fun and adventure and emotion. And she wanted it to be like an active, quick-paced ride. Like, let's keep it
Mm.
moving. And so what she told me is, if I find myself getting slowed down or tired, or it just is like going through quicksand in any part, I'm cutting it.
Mm. Mm. Okay, so what was the feedback from the readers or the reviews?
Yeah. So readers, before I sent it for publishing, um, I think the big feedback positive was how vulnerable and brave the work was, which was very nice to keep me going because I was so scared
Mm.
putting something so raw out there. The other feedback that was fascinating is a lot of people, after reading it, opened up to me about their own sexual stories, which was
Mm.
fascinating because I thought, oh, the book is working. It's helping people connect to their own stories. Because ultimately, when you put a book in the world, it's no longer your story. It's my book, but it's no longer mine. And I had a hard time understanding that until I started sharing it with readers and realized people are going to respond to the parts of the story that resonate for them, and it becomes their story. It
Mm.
becomes, they see themselves in it. So people all had something, and their stories were all very different than mine, but that kept me going. And then some of the biggest criticism I got early on from several people was, is this a self-help book or a memoir? Because in the beginning, I was, I think, putting on the therapist hat a little and giving too
Mm.
much like research or, you know, kind of
Yeah.
self-helpy, and it wasn't clear. I was not intending for it to be a self-help book, but I think that's we all have our defenses of where we stop being as honest in the writing. And when it was things I was scared to write about, I would put on my professional hat, my therapist hat. And I didn't realize I was doing it. But when I got the like third or fourth person saying, "Oh, is this a self-help book?" And then I had one person read it who was a writer and said, "You have to really decide if you want to write a memoir or you want to write a self-help book." I said,
Mm.
"No, I want to write a memoir." So that feedback was crucial to me doing my own edit and my editor to really make sure it is a memoir. And if it helps
Mm.
people, that's wonderful, but it's not meant to be self-help.
Yeah, that's a very good feedback.
Yeah.
Okay, what about like angry readers who did not like the subject matter,
Yeah.
like especially the title "sex goddess"? Especially they believe that women should not be that open about their sexuality
Yes.
or their
Yeah.
sexual adventures. Did you get
Yes.
any of those? And if yes, how did you deal with them?
Yeah. I did not from my readers because they were handpicked. Um, when you are before your book publishes, I think you're aware, right? It goes on to BookBub and it's
Yeah.
on all these places where people can get copies of the book in exchange for a review. And I had a publicist at the time who was basically sending me all these wonderful reviews. And I was like, "Okay, Jesse, but what are we doing with the really bad reviews?" And she was like, "First of all, there's not too many of those." She said, "But I want you to know, you have to believe in your book, because I think it's a great, well-written book. And the people who don't like it, it is not the right book for them."
Exactly. Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, I've read books that I'm like, oh, this I just don't, I'm not, one of my proudest moments was I did have a review from someone who's asexual
Okay.
and said, and I did get a review saying, "What about the people who are asexual? How come you're writing this book about sex? But what if someone's
Mm.
asexual?" And I was like, well, then it's probably not the right book for them. But I
Yeah.
ended up having a reader who was asexual and defined herself. She said, "I'm asexual and I was curious about your book." And she's like, "While I didn't find some of the more, steamy sections arousing, I did find them very interesting and I found it a really good read." And I was like, "What? See, an asexual
Mm.
person can read a book, so it's not for everyone. I think there was definitely people I had who reviewed who were upset by the, like, there was one review, I think we often send to like Kirkus or some of these bigger reviewers. And I had a man who reviewed the book. And it was so clear he hadn't read the book because he basically just gave a summary, like he flipped delicately through the pages, like afraid to touch them, and basically gave a summary of like random chapters throughout the book, but didn't say anything. And then commented on how this book is just about titillation more than depth or something like that. And I was like, oh, you didn't even read the book because there's not that many. There's some spicy scenes in it, but there's a lot more introspection and depth and emotion. So I was like, so I think a lot of people, right, the saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. I think a lot of people judge a book by its cover. I have the book with me. I don't know if I'm sure you've seen it, if you have a copy, right? Yeah. So it's a pretty sexy cover. And I think there's a lot of people who, if they're uncomfortable with sex, are like, whoa, this is all just to bring, they're just trying to be titillating. So I definitely had gotten, interestingly, from men on that end, this is just, and on the other end, I had a male reader who was disappointed. He was expecting Sex Goddess to be more like porn goddess, like his expectation. I was like, that's porn you're talking about. That's not sex. I'm about sex positivity. Like, you're describing the scenes you were hoping were in the book were scenes that he had seen in porn. And it was like, not my book. That's not my book.
So I feel like there's a more openness now to talk about like female sexuality. And I'm not sure if you heard about this show on, I forgot where. I recently found out about it. It's called Dying for Sex.
I did. Yeah, Michelle Williams. She just won for it. She won an award.
This is how I heard about it. Yeah. Because she won the award. And she was in a sexless marriage because she was sick. And so she went on a kind of a sex exploration journey. Do you find like similar themes between the show and your book? Even though the trigger for her was completely different than the trigger for you.
I do. And what was really interesting for her, I do find similar themes. And it was handled really beautifully in the movie. And it was really it was a woman who had a significant life change, which was her cancer diagnosis, and had been in a sexless marriage for a long time. And knew she was going to die. And she was like, her goal was, I am not going to die without having an orgasm with a partner. She had only had orgasms with masturbation.
Yeah.
So it's really a tale. I think all of these, it's female empowerment. It's women saying like, this is my own body and I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure out what gives me pleasure, and it's a healthy, normal, wonderful thing to be able to do. And I think they handled that really well in the movie. It was a lot more, if you watch it's a beautifully done, but it's a lot more about her dying, or it's equally, if not as much about her dying as it is about sex. And so I was like, I thought I was watching something light. This is really heavy.
I haven't finished it. I just started watching it.
It's really heavy, but it's beautiful because I think even that idea of a woman like never having an orgasm with a partner is not unusual, but how amazing that she sort of was like, I'm going to make this my mission before I die.
So do you have any other books in mind?
So I've started working. So I've originally had an idea that after I do this, I would do a self-help book. But now I've sort of want to get as far away from like sex as the topic necessarily. And I've actually started writing like a fantasy science fiction book, kind of
Oh,
more fiction. So it's like,
completely different. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to actually continue with it, but right now I feel like I'm sort of just doing a large overcorrection for like, let me just do something completely different to keep the, my creative juices flowing. And it's been really fun. It's just been really fun to write. And I think I also wanted to do something that's not so obviously about me. I think as writers, whether we write fiction or write about other people, we're always writing about something in ourselves or our experiences. And so, but it's been fun to write something that it's like, it's not me. I am not the main character in this book talking about myself. That's been lovely. That's been really a lovely thing to do. Yeah.
Oh, so how can people reach you? How can they get your book, get in touch with you?
So the easiest way is probably through my website. It's just my name, Alisa Kriegel. I don't know if it came up on here. I put it in.
Yeah.
So AlisaKriegel.com. That's it. It's at AlisaKriegel.com. And on there, my book is on there, information about my book, reviews. You can message me through my website. There is also my podcast is on there as well. So all of my podcast episodes, which are more specifically about sex, but really very much about the title of the podcast, Let's Talk About Sex. Really, it's very much about communication and kind of sex education, all the things we don't talk about that we should be talking about. So the podcast is on there, and there's a link to buy the book from whatever place you prefer to buy books.
Okay, great. This is great. Well, thank you very much, Alisa. This been a wonderful, enlightening discussion. And for anyone who's listening or watching, make sure to check Alisa's book. I'm gonna get the title right. Or
okay.
You can tell me, or the title. What's the title?
From Sexless. Here, I'm gonna hold it up because I have it.
Yeah.
From Sexless Marriage to Sex Goddess, a memoir.
Great. And feel free to reach out to Alisa on her website, as you mentioned.
Please, and follow me. I have my Instagrams. Follow me wherever you follow people. Would be wonderful.
Great. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thank you for joining us for another episode of Read and Write with Natasha. And until we meet again.